morning, Ohio State fans. Welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Thursday, September 11th. I am joined by our beat correspondent, Andy Anders. Andy, how are you doing this Thursday?
Doing stupendous, George. How are you?
I'm doing all right, Andy. I want to talk to you today about special teams, but before I get too far in the weeds on that, I do want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio, the official bank of 11 Warriors and the 11th Dubcast. From game day to workday, First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners that keep Central Ohio thriving. They are locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. You can give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. Andy, I am 31 years old. I'm going to be 32 in November. I was raised up on Jim Tressel, Ohio State football. And that man's philosophy was that the most important play in this sport is the punt. So from a very, very young age, I have been fostered up recognizing the value of special teams in this sport. And that was probably the biggest growing pain I had, as great as the Urban Meyer era was. That was probably the most annoying thing about the transition from the Tressel era to the Urban era, is that we lost that. It was almost like kicking and punting became an afterthought just because it was so consistently brilliant under Tressel, and then there were so many faltering moments of that under Urban Meyer. And I kind of hoped that was going to go away as we transitioned out of the Urban era to the Ryan Day era. And although there have been some nice moments, there's also been moments like what happened with Noah Ruggles against Georgia a handful of years ago. And there have been, it feels like lately, more special teams blunders than brilliant moments. And if there's one criticism that you can give for Ohio State this early in the season, it feels like the special teams haven't quite been up to par with how great the defense has been and how promising the offense looks. That was something you kind of wrote about earlier this week relative to what we've seen out of the punt return unit. So I'm wondering if maybe you could extrapolate a little bit on that for us. What's been kind of the letdowns? Who are the candidates to potentially address that issue going into the later stages of the season? And how do you think that the team goes about rectifying that issue relative to what we've seen from the first two games?
For sure. And Ryan Day called it a red flag on Tuesday in his press conference, which I think was a term that hits you pretty stark for a game they won 70-0, but it was true. I mean, the quote he gave was they lost 47 yards, hidden yards in punts they didn't field. And we spoke with Brandon Ennis on Wednesday. He gave the indication that part of the struggle for him was the wind in the stadium. And the way, like, some of the punts, they weren't exactly the best, easiest to read punts from Johnny Schifano, Grambling State's punter, who got 7 chances to punt on Saturday. We got a lot of data because of how dominant Ohio State's defense was, right? And I think that's a big part of it, right? You just fielding punts in the first place. It was a problem then. I even think back to the 2023 Cotton Bowl when Jaden Ballard was the punt returner and had multiple fake costly punts that he either didn't field when he should have or shouldn't have fielded when he did. Like he fair caught one that was inside of the 10 that could have bounced into the end zone for a touchback. This has been a persistent problem, I feel like, for Ohio State. Today's aware of it and they're trying to address it. It's been rare that Ohio State's had a dynamic punt returner really since Jalen Marshall in that Urban Meyer era, 2014, 2015. Caleb Downs had the first punt return touchdown in 10 years since Marshall last season, but he's not someone they're going to use back there consistently. We've seen Jeremiah Smith deployed against Texas, and he really went out there to fair catch a ball. It felt like he was almost getting back in rhythm after the 2 drops. Like, they don't seem to have a consistent idea of who their best option is to put back there that isn't a star who you don't want to get injured on a punt return, right? Like, yes, it's great in theory to put Jeremiah Smith back there. He's explosive. He's as fast as anyone on the team. Sure-handed, of course. Normally, again, the glove change aside, but that is not someone I think you feel comfortable putting back there multiple times a game, more than 2 times a game, let's say. So As much as it's picking nits to point at the punt return and go, "Gotta be fixed coming out of the 70-0 win," it is, and they said as much. And so what's the strategy going forward is they're gonna have use a rotation of guys, it sounds like. That's what Day made it sound like. Jeremiah, Caleb, Brandon Ennis is still gonna be involved, although I know it's really been disappointing because at the beginning of last year, it looked like Brandon Ennis was the answer, that he was gonna be a great punt returner and really didn't do much with it the back half of last season and in this past game, as he spoke about too on Wednesday, really just it was bad. It was bad from a perspective of fielding punts he needed to field and saving field position. One name I was surprised that Day didn't bring up on Tuesday when he talked about this was Bryson Rogers, because Bryson Rogers had a fantastic punt return, the one really good punt return moment, good special teams moment in general from Ohio State in that Grambling State game. But it was called back for a fair catch. I honestly, I tried when I wrote about it. I scoured the internet looking for a replay of that play. Maybe you saw on TV me being in the press box. I don't know who called fair
Oh,
catch on the
our
play.
Slack exploded because it was the only good special teams play of the game for Ohio State. So I remember it quite fondly.
Yes, exactly. I don't even know who called fair catch still, if it was Bryson, if it was somebody else, but he has this amazing explosive punt return. Then the refs get together and call it back, saying it was a fair catch. So you can't even see it in the box score now. Like, it's not like it was called back for a penalty. You go on stat broadcast, it just says fair catch. Um, But I was surprised not to see Bryson included in that conversation from Ryan for that reason. I don't know if there's something else with him that they're concerned about, or if he's playing it close to the vest, or if that was an anomaly what he did. But yeah, I would like to see him get a few more chances if he's going to do that consistently, and Jeremiah Smith mixing in there. But this has been a persistent issue, and it's like how persistent an issue it's been over the last several years. It's somewhat hard to have faith that it's going to get fixed. But I think there's solutions at Ohio State's disposal. It's just how much do you want to put certain players at risk?
Yeah, there's that phrase, if you have two quarterbacks, you really have none. I guess if you have four potential candidates at punt returner, you really have none. It's the embarrassment of riches like we've seen at wide receiver, except they just can't figure out which guy they want to commit to. I will say, I think a lot of people were caught off guard by, Jeremiah Smith going out there for Texas, but I definitely agree with you that my first instinct when they put him out there was that it's kind of like in basketball when you've got like a known shooter going through a slump. You want to get them to the free throw line to get some freebies to get their confidence back. It's, kind of the same thing, although he did blame it on the glove change, I think, more than anything else. But I'm sure just, fielding a punt probably at least got him going a little bit mentally to a certain extent. But yeah, I mean, you would think with one of the, like, you point to moments that stick out to people from last season. And I think, like, one of the undisputed top probably three feel good moments of the season, maybe at least the regular season, if we want to put brackets on it, was that Caleb Downs punt return. And yeah, you don't want to necessarily expose your best players to the prospect of getting hurt, particularly on special teams. But, and this might be a little bit of a lazy comparison, I think about a guy that made a similar impact at the same position that Downs plays in Tyrann Mathieu, who was a Heisman candidate safety in his own right at LSU. And it wasn't just because of what he was doing on defense. He was making a massive impact for those LSU teams on special teams. And so there is something to be said that if you want to make that a impact area of your team and be aggressive with it, putting your best, most talented players in a position to do something with the ball during those reps, there's an argument for putting Caleb Downs in that spot. At the same time, I think I would lean more towards, with the depth of talent that this team has, having somebody like a Bryson Rogers in that spot. So I'm curious. It seems like you're kind of leaning towards that too, but I'm wondering if the decision were up to you, if you could commit to one person right now into that role, who would you choose? Bryson Rogers, or would you go with somebody else?
Well, based on what we've seen so far, I think Bryson, yes, would be my answer. And again, I'm factoring in if injuries were not a factor here, if I weren't worried about putting a player in harm's way, it'd be Jeremiah Smith. I think he's the best open field athlete on the team, bar none. But barring that, I think if you're not willing to expose him to that risk, which is absolutely fair, Bryson Rogers would probably be my pick then.
All right, fair enough. Um, Unfortunately, this is not merely an issue special teams wise that is limited to punt returner, because one of the big areas of criticism in the game against Texas, and probably one of the things that makes Matt Patricia's the game that he called defensively even more impressive in hindsight, was that Ohio State really did not get a lot out of its punter in that game. The field position could have been a lot better for where Ohio State's defense was starting out in that game, and yet they were still able to limit Texas to 7 points. The only touchdown of which really just came not quite in garbage time, but late in the fourth quarter. Uh, Joe McGuire has not necessarily been up to what we want to see. What a lot of people have been wanting to see, including myself, since last season, has been the long awaited debut of the Australian Nick McLarty. Now, when
Big
we were
Kick Nick. That's my nickname. Put a trademark on it.
you
Big
got
Kick Nick.
all right, I'll credit you for that every time I reference it going forward. And I listen, I bought all the way into the hype when we were asked on this show last season for our dark horse award candidates, when it looked like McLarty was going to start like a couple weeks before the first game, I said, I'm all in on the McLarty hype based on those videos. Give me Nick McLarty, Lube Groza, dark horse winner for that. And at that point, he hadn't even shed his black stripe yet. And that didn't end up happening until this past offseason. So a little bit behind schedule. We still want to see it. And there was a comment that Day made at Media Days today indicating that he's making progress, but he's still not quite there yet. So I'm just wondering, can you shed a little bit more light on that situation for us? Do you think we're going to see Nick McLarty at some point this year, or do you think that we're just going to have to hold out hope that Joe McGuire has some better performances in store for us as we get towards the middle and later points of this season?
Absolutely. And looking at Joe, I think he was fine last year. This is his second year as the starting punter, replacing Jesse Mirko, who was also kind of fine, maybe a little better than that prior to his transfer out of Ohio State. And they brought in Nick. They brought in even Anthony Vineri from Buffalo. They brought in three guys to compete for the punting job last year, basically, with McGuire. And McGuire was kind of like last year, he was the guy you least expected. You thought, they got McLarty from Australia, they got Vineri, and then you thought it was like Joe McGuire was kind of an afterthought in that competition, but he ends up winning it. And what won him it was his consistency. And what is keeping him as the starter right now is his consistency. And you look at what happened against Texas, and I know like recency bias, it's like that wasn't very consistent. Some of the couple of the shanks that he had in there, but last year he was. He was like reliably going to boot it 40 to 45 yards. He's not groom. He's not out there launching a groomer boomer to go back to a Tressel guy that I know we both love, but he was consistent for them last year, and that's where McLarty is lacking. And if Nick has easily the strongest leg in the room, probably one of the strongest legs that's ever been through Ohio State. The guy, when he hits it right, can send it 60 yards or send it 50 something with a great hang time. Like when he connects, it's amazing. The problem is with a leg that big, he's had problems with a lot of mishits, and that was the case watching him in preseason camp last year. Um, he like if you have a punter that it's a coin flip whether you're going to get a 30-yard punt or a 50-yard punt, or you have a punter who you are confident can give you a 40-yard punt every time, you take the 40-yard guy because you only punt so many times in a game, and the risk of the shank is much greater than the reward of potentially booming a punt. So it's always been about consistency with Nick. And once he finds it, I think he'll be the starting punter for this team. I think he's closer to finding it than he was last season. I think that's why he lost the black stripe. I think that's why he was the only punter to the one punt. He did it against Grambling State, right? Um, they wanted to give him that opportunity in game. And what Ryan said today, I thought was a little bit encouraging, because what he said is almost there was an indication that Nick has found a little more confidence and a little more consistency in practice this week, coming off that game rep, getting a good punt in a game. Where last year, he got 1 or 2 opportunities to punt, and they were either the one or the two were shanks. That he didn't do well when he got his chances last year. So once he finds that consistency, he's got the potential to be fantastic at punter. But he's just gotta, again, once he gets to that level where he can boom it with consistency or even take a little power off of it to get that consistency, that's when I think he can overtake Joe McGuire. And I'm not going to write off that happens this year. I think there's an actual chance of that.
Well, I would certainly like to see it sooner rather than later. I'm not sure if we're going to get a lot of test cases against Ohio this coming weekend. We might have to wait until we get into the Big Ten portion of the schedule and some teams actually start showing a little bit more firm resistance before midfield to Ohio State before they get into kicking range or for field goals. But the opportunities I think are eventually at some point they're going to need to punt the ball. Not every drive is going to be one that yields points or at least a trip to the red zone. So they're going to need the punter soon. I do hope that McLarty keeps making progress. At the very least, it would be nice to see McGuire return to form, so to speak, and not have a repeat of the Texas game. But only time will tell for that. In the meantime, we've got a couple days left before the Ohio game, which, it's nice we find a happy medium between playing the number one overall ranked team in the country and an FCS opponent. I think Ohio will be an interesting test. Again, it's an in-state opponent. Ohio State hasn't lost to one of those in over 100 years or something at this point. I can't imagine the streak is in great jeopardy. And now that I've said that, obviously the game is going to be much tighter than anybody or any of us could have expected. But if it's an exciting game, I'm all for it as long as Ohio State wins. And I look forward to that. And I look forward to helping you and the rest of the beat, Andy, with covering that game this weekend. So it should be a good time. Until then, we'll be back tomorrow with Dan Hope to preview the Ohio game this coming Saturday. And before we go, one more thank you to First Bank of Central Ohio, the official bank of 11 Warriors and the 11 Dubcast for sponsoring this program. Andy, thank you for joining me. And thank you for tuning into the 11th Dubcast. We'll be back tomorrow with Dan Hope. Take care, folks.